commencer à l'heure la session. Et encore une fois, c'est un plaisir pour moi d'écouter la délégation, nos invités de la délégation anglaise. Et le premier orateur est le professeur Norman Williams de Londres. Donc en français, la recherche chirurgicale, le collège et le gouvernement travaillent à créer des incitations et renforcer l'organisation. Nous sommes heureux d'entendre ce sujet qui pose beaucoup de problèmes. La recherche chirurgicale pose beaucoup de problèmes en France.
Merci bien. C'est un grand plaisir, Monsieur le Président, d'être parmi vous aujourd'hui. Notre groupe voudrait nouer des relations avec l'Académie nationale de chirurgie. L'objectif de nos présentations est de mettre en avant quelques-uns des domaines sur lesquels nous travaillons et que nous essayons de faire avancer. Malheureusement, comme vous pouvez l'attendre, mon français est loin d'être parfait. C'est vrai. Dans le reste de ma présentation, sera en anglais. N'hésitez pas à m'interrompre. That means please interrupt. I apologize. Si quelque chose ne vous paraît pas clair. Merci bien. Right, this one. Okay. Yeah. Right. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about the college, the Royal College, and concentrate on research. My colleagues will be concentrating on other aspects of our work. So the Royal College of Surgeons, situated in Lincoln's Inn Field, is led by the elected President and Council and constitutes all the specialties. We also have a larger council which meets 6 times a year, which consists of all the presidents of the main specialty associations, of which there are 9. But underneath that, there are 58 different specialty societies. The college does an enormous amount in research, and we are trying to develop this substantially and have been doing so in the last 4 or 5 years. So we primarily, at the present, use the Research Fellowship Scheme, which was established in 1993, which is whereby young surgeons are given time in a university department to carry out a particular project. It's a very competitive exercise to get one of the Royal College of Surgeons fellowships. We often get 100, 120 applications for possibly only 15 positions. The fellowship scheme allows certain partnerships between other councils, other research councils, and also various countries like Europe, like the States, Canada, as you can see there, and Australia. We send our fellows all over the world. We have also other awards for priming grants for newly appointed consultants, and also we have set up some intercalated BScs, that's Bachelor of Sciences, for certain medical students. We also have a very strong clinical effectiveness unit, which basically audits across the spectra of surgery, and as you can see, there are a whole array of those audits. These are very important because they allow us to set standards for surgery across the United Kingdom. The fellowship scheme, as you can see, includes fellowships in the whole raft of specialties. This has been an extremely successful scheme, and we recently audited it externally, and you can see those were the conclusions. It helped surgical research by increasing the pool of surgeons willing to embark on an academic career, and also, of course, benefited indirectly patient care. One of the problems in the United Kingdom, however, is that the amount of government money spent on research is very small. You can see from this figure in 2006 to 2007, only 1.3% of government-funded medical research was spent on surgical research, despite the fact that surgery looks after, and surgical teams look after, a third of those patients that are admitted to our hospitals. So it's very important that we try and change the culture. And I think across Europe it's very similar. Those figures are very similar. And it's particularly in the areas of the development and assessment of innovative techniques that combat surgical disease, i.e. surgical technology, that is under researched and not developed appropriately. And it's our view that surgical innovations need development, assessment and dissemination, otherwise we will lose them in translation. They will not be widely taken up. So why do we think like that? We think like that because the evidence base for surgical interventions actually is very poor, and we need to abandon certain techniques that have become used and with no good evidence base. And when assessing surgical techniques, of course, they're not like drugs. You can't apply the same means of assessment towards surgical interventions as you can, of course, with drugs. You can't do a dose response curve in relationship to surgery. And also the gold standard of prospective randomized controlled trials, of course, is not always applicable, as we all know. If you've got if you're doing a study between a sphincter saving operation and a permanent colostomy, how can you get informed consent in that sort of situation? How can you randomize patients appropriately? The other thing that we've all seen, and I'm sure this is the same in France as it is in the UK, that new procedures are very slow to enter routine clinical practice. In my own area of rectal cancer, of course, Bill Heald developed the concept of total mesorectal excision, but in fact it took a long, long time before he was able to establish that as the new gold standard. And in fact those studies were done in Scandinavia and not in the UK. So you also need very large numbers of patients in a trial to determine efficacy, and that's often not possible in surgery. It's quite difficult to do because the recruitment often is poor. We do have some very successful trials, but they're few and far between. If you look at these figures, you can see this was 2010. Only 2.6% of all patients with upper GI cancer in the UK were entered into trials. In my own area of colorectal cancer, you can see that, and we think we are very good at putting patients into trials. You can see that only 8% of patients go into trials. And that's where cancer is very prominent, but it's even worse if patients don't have cancer. And why should that be the case? This is my wife's present to me last Christmas. She bought me a television, and I thought she knows I like watching sport, very kind of her. And then I was thinking about this problem, about why is it that we don't have this culture of doing multi-center trials with numerous patients. I just didn't quite know. I was looking at the television and thinking this, and then I went round the back, and this was the back of the television, and it occurred to me that really we don't have an infrastructure. It's a problem. There's no infrastructure, there's no leadership, and there's a lack of academic capacity to do this sort of work. So at the Royal College, we've tried to address this issue in the last 5-6 years, and we've put a lot of effort into this. And because we are a national group, we can engage with politicians and decision makers. So we've employed these tactics: logical argument, use the data I just showed you, the lack of investment in surgical research. We've talked to ministers, including the Secretary of State for Health, about this problem. We've engaged with different partnerships across the piece, our Medical Research Council. But even despite doing all of this, we were not getting very far. So we ran a PR campaign, public relations campaign, and we decided we would also lead by example. So we put pressure on these gentlemen, who you don't have to worry about them, but basically these are individuals who were pushing forward a new academic training scheme. We put pressure on them, and we were able to increase the number of surgical academic fellows and lecturers. But this was the thing that really did it. This was a PR campaign led by a company, a public relations company called Health Mandate, who worked with us to produce this document, From Theory to Theatre. And it explained the problems to both the public and, very importantly, the public. We engaged the public in this. And suddenly I was invited on to the radio, television, etc., and was able to put our points forward, the lack of engagement with from central government in funding this sort of research. We also decided to relook at our research strategy and produced appropriate documents in relationship to that. And we had certain strategic aims, one of which was to establish an institution of surgical research, which was primarily a clinical research initiative. We appointed a director of research, and we raised and started off raising funds, and the target, as you can see, is £10 million over 3 years. I'm not sure how that translates into euros. I think we're doing quite well at the moment, actually, in the euro change. And very important strategic aim was to increase the number of fellowships that I told you about, because that had been a very successful program. So we determined to do that. We also determined to increase the awareness of research and training of research within the training program. So we're developing research modules within our curriculum so that our trainees can critically appraise studies, can understand statistics, and design an appropriate study where appropriate. We also decided we needed to develop a trials culture in surgery and an infrastructure, which I mentioned. And this is now the plan as far as the infrastructure nationally is concerned. So basically, we're setting up clinical research centres across the country in different specialties. We're having champions. In fact, they're going to be professors of surgical research allied to the college, working in those sort of areas. Those depends what the areas will be depending on the applications, because this is going to be a competitive process. And this will link in to various networks across the country. And we're starting to do this. We're just starting to develop this and have got appropriate funding. And we started in 2011. We've appointed our director. And this is also wound up with politics, actually. You may not be aware, but our health system has been under a lot of political machinations recently. Since we have a new government, we now have a Health and Social Care Act, and that was a very difficult and divisive act that came in, caused a lot of upset and occupied huge amounts of our time. But that is now an act, and this is changing the face of the way we practice medicine and, importantly, surgery in the country. But I won't these are the principles of the reforms, just for interest's sake. And we had a lot of dialogue and was able to change quite a lot that was in the bill before it became an act. So, as you can see, this is going to be a clinical-led health service. We're going to be collaborating rather than competing, which was in the original bill. But very important for this talk, the duties of our health minister. He has a actual legislated position here to provide education, training and research. And that research part of it is absolutely essential, and we were able to put that into the Act. So that's been very important. But this is just to give you a feel of some of the problems we had in getting, and in this Act. It was highly politicized, and we were forced into an extraordinary general meeting, as is depicted here. And you can see in that far corner Professor Narula demonstrating his oratorical skills during this extraordinary general meeting. And this was all about trying to ensure that the college remained in dialogue with the politicians. That was absolutely crucial for all sorts of reasons. That was the first extraordinary general meeting that had been held since 1948. The first one had been held in 1948, and this was the only second time one had been held. 1948 is a very important date because that was when our National Health Service came into being, and all the colleges and our British Medical Association was against the National Health Service, apart from our college, which voted for it. And as a result of this critical engagement, we were also able to influence the politicians. That's our CMO, she's our Chief Medical Officer, who had done nothing for surgical research up to that point, nothing. But as you can see, just in the beginning of this year, she issued a call for research for the evaluation of technology-driven implanted or implantable medical devices, surgical procedures or surgical services. And that wouldn't have happened if we hadn't been in political dialogue, and that was achieved by critical engagement. And that's the power of a coordinated college that engages with government. And I think we want to ensure that our research endeavours grow significantly, just in fact like your new president. I think I've got that right. La croissance. Yes. Well, we want to apply that to growth of research. Yeah. You may have a problem though. But and so that's my presentation. And would you like me, Mr. President, to go on and we go on with the other presentations, or you want us to have questions? Okay. If anybody would like to ask any question on that. Yes? The slide, oh, it's upsetting you. You feel somewhat you feel bad. Yeah, okay. Can we turn it off? Yeah. Sorry. Is that better? Okay.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
It was, we have also a lot of problems with the organization of research in France. I give the talk to Professor Henri Bismuth.
I have one question.
Yes. 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 Yes.
It is not
No.
like this.
No, sure. It is similar in the UK. That's exactly what happened. When I came through, you had to do a period of research because it was so competitive. And in order to get the next job, you had to prove that you had performed a decent, you used to have a higher degree. The situation for a while, because students could come in and go right the way through without breaking their training, that stopped. But now, because of the pressure on posts, research has come back, and the people who are really advancing and getting the jobs at the end are having to do research, and many of them are the very brightest and best actually who get through, but that's what's happening. So it's not mandatory, but yeah, pleasure.
I have a short question. In the curriculum of a student, do you take in count the quota of publication on the basis of quota of the publication, quota of impact factor, and so and so? You take in count in the college?
Yeah, well, for promotion, as it were, the publications are looked at. It's a question of how much weight is put on them. If you have a higher degree, if you have a higher degree like a PhD, you are more likely to get a decent job. And also, of course, there are particular academic posts that a cadre of people will go through and get with a higher degree. So it's becoming more important, and it's the quality that's important as well as the actual number of publications.
Another problem is that in France now we have no surgical institute for research like when I was young. For example, when I was a resident in the department of Professor Malegui, on the first floor there were a floor entirely devoted to the research with possibility to work on the dog, to do a lot of different work. Now it's finished. We are under the power of biologists.
Yes.
And so.
Yes.
What do you think of that?
Well, I think it's right that certain types of research are done at that level with scientists, But what I turn back to, and that's why I wanted to stress, was the surgical technology aspect, which I think is very much the domain of the surgeon. And I think for us in the UK, things are turning round now, and what we're showing is that we're investing, and as you could see, the call from our National Institute of Health Research, which I just explained, they are actually understanding the importance of surgical research, not just for academia's sake, but for actual the benefit of business. Because there are lots of partnerships now between medical technology companies and universities to develop those sort of ideas to improve actually the wealth of the country. So that's becoming an important aspect as well.
Georges Mention from Besançon. Georges Mention is a president of Federation of College of Surgical Specialties.
Ah, yes.
For your talk.
Thank
Just
you.
one specific point about PhD.
Yes.
What is the rate of a surgical fellow who will have a PhD?
Yes.
And what is the need for PhD? Is to be academic, professor
Yes.
in surgery,
Yes.
or for industry?
Yes. Well, I think if you're in surgery and you do a PhD, there is a substantial chance that you will end up as a professor of surgery, and you would need that really nowadays. Yeah, you would need that. Yeah. Good. President, should we move on or? No, I think that's fine. Yeah, he just wants to put that back. Yeah,
No.
Tony.
Thank you very much.